Howdy and welcome to Bamberger Ranch. My name is Aldo Leopold. I'm the director of the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute, and we're going to continue our Leopold Live series here at Bamberger, continuing to talk about the 5 basic tools introduced by Aldo Leopold, the father of wildlife management. These 5 tools include cow, axe, plow, fire, and gun. And what we hope to do in the upcoming months is show you how those tools can be applied, but with very specific projects and objectives. And so with me is Dr. April Sansom. She's the executive director of Bamberger, and she's going to tell us a little bit about Bamberger and what we hope to cover in the series.
Great. Thank you so much, Roel. We're really excited to have you and your colleagues from the Natural Resources Institute back here at Selah Bamberger Ranch Preserve. And we're excited about continuing our journey into Leopold Live version 2. Like Roel said, we'll be providing more detail and more useful information regarding the 5 tools that Aldo Leopold championed. Here at Selah Bamberger Ranch Preserve, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our mission is landowner stewardship, outreach, and environmental education. So we have many Central Texas school children that come visit us every year for hands-on science-based environmental education lessons, and we also lead showcase tours and workshops for landowners interested in practicing restoration and good land stewardship. So we're very happy to be partnering with Natural Resources Institute, and we know that you'll benefit a lot from the information that we are going to be talking about during this new version of Leopold Live.
So let's go ahead and get started.
Great. Good morning and welcome back to Bamberger Ranch Preserve. We are excited to be participating once again in Leopold Live, and we're going to be talking today with our friends here about managing properties across landscapes in a collaborative manner. We know that one of the biggest challenges to conservation and wildlife management, particularly in Central Texas today, is the fragmentation of large family ranch lands into smaller properties. And so we're going to be talking with our friends and neighbors here today about managing a series of smaller acreage properties as one large unit. And we're going to learn about how that's done right here next door to us at a place called the Ranches of Brushy Top. And so I'll take the opportunity to introduce my friends that I have here today. We have Stephen Harrell. Hi, Stephen.
How you doing?
This is Patty Harrell.
Hello.
And we have Becky Vavrek and George Vavrek.
Good morning.
And before we really get started in our discussion, I'd like to thank all of you very much, not only for being here today, but for being such great neighbors as well. And the other thing that these wonderful folks do is they're all Texas Master Naturalists, and they're all very active in the Texas Master Naturalist program, which is a wonderful program that really focuses on education, particularly when it comes to outreach and working with kids. And so Stephen and Patty and Becky and George, not only are they great neighbors, but they're also fantastic volunteers, and they spend a lot of time here at Bamberger Ranch Preserve helping us with our programming. And so thank you all very much for that.
Thank you.
Before we get started, would you like to say anything else about the Master Naturalist program that I may have forgotten?
It's an interesting program. It was originally thought of, I think of, in the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, if I'm not mistaken. And they were looking for a way to have more volunteers in the parks take care of some of the things that they wanted to do. I know that sounds pretty vague just offhand, but it expanded from there. They quickly realized that not only could they accomplish some of the chores they wanted to take care of in the park, they could actually introduce some new programs and some new opportunities for visitors to the park. And it just grew from there. And
20th year this year, or just
Yeah.
20th year for the chapter we're in?
our chapter, I believe, is now 20 years old. I have only been a master naturalist since 2018, so I'm not totally up on the history there. But just lost my train of thought.
Great educational opportunities of how we could be good stewards of the land,
Excellent.
which Bamberger also helps further that education.
Right.
We need to be stewards of our own property and all the hill country.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Master Naturalist program and those who are certified Master Naturalists is such a great partnership for us here at Bamberger Ranch Preserve. So once again, thank you all for being part of that important program. So let's talk a little bit about, I mentioned that these lovely people are also our neighbors. So let's talk a little bit about the ranches at Brushy Top. If you would please, can you give us a little bit of background? Tell us a little bit about the ranches of Brushy Top.
Go start.
Okay. Ranches of Brushy Top is a 2,000 acre, or a little over 2,000 acre ranch that is managed as a single ranch, although we have, I think, somewhere around 140 lots right now, and 80 people living on various size lots. Some of those are at 75 acres, some of those are closer to 6 or 8 acres.
Oh, so there's quite a variety in the
Yes.
size of acreage.
Exactly. And we manage the land as a 1D1 ag exemption with exotics we raise. And each person can manage their own parcel, of course, any way they want to. But almost everyone that I've met at Ranches Brushy Top, all of our neighbors, are very oriented towards managing, stewarding the land more towards what it was supposed to be like, right? So we do a lot of work both towards the ag exemption as well as managing our land, clearing, finding ways to help wildlife, that kind of thing, water,
Fantastic.
supplemental feeding to some extent. But, so, as I said, not everybody is as enthusiastic about doing it, but almost everybody welcomes that kind of land.
That's great. That's wonderful. So talk to me, tell us about what the exotic species that you have on the ranches at Brushy Top are.
Oh my. Scimitar horned oryx, lechwe, elk, black buck, and some that, well, axes, and one of the most fun animals, the fallow deer. They're fun because they have big splayed antlers. They're very pretty, much like the scimitar horned oryx, of course.
Very
Something like
beautiful.
that. And of course the state's white-tailed deer venture across your property to our
Well.
property too.
Yes. Yes, and so
as well.
Oh, hares and wild turkey. And,
Good.
Of course, we have a lot of great bird species, including the cardinals that are there all year. But we do occasionally have a coyote, and theoretically, occasionally a mountain lion.
right. Absolutely.
So keeping all those in
Bobcats.
balance. Oh, definitely. Have
Sure. Lots of bobcat.
Ringtail cats. Ringtail cats for sure. At least in our bird feeders.
Skunks, raccoons, possums. You know, it's a country
Armadillos.
place.
All the ones that you would expect. Right,
Yeah.
right.
A few poisonous snakes, not too many, but a couple species.
Right. And so you have a program where those exotics are harvested And so talk about how that happens and how that relates to your white-tailed deer harvest.
Well, and good question. The exotics are not harvested
Okay.
except for the elk. And the elk, as a result of chronic waste disease, can't easily be moved without a lot of paperwork.
Yes, sir.
So we do harvest those and sell them, but the others are sold or traded in to other ranches, to hunting leases, to wherever we can sell or trade. Basically, just like any ranch land you would have out here.
Yes, sir.
Elk being the only harvested species, white-tailed deer are culled. And of course, those are the meat is used by either people in the ranch or sometimes given away. The Sika are not, although they're exotic, they're not traded much or sold much. There's not a big market for them.
Right.
So we do cull those also in order to provide more grassland. Okay, and that's an important aspect to this. Is we mostly all of those exotics live from the grass. We supplemental feed them when necessary, especially cold, freezing area times.
Right.
But for the most part, we don't feed them any. We don't buy a lot of food per year. We do manage the herd size for each one of those. The ranch manager does that, of course, and reports to the association at what he wants to do or what he thinks needs to be done.
Wonderful.
Flashlight surveys are done to make sure we have the best accurate count that we can of the species that are on the ranch. But from that, the ranch manager also ascertains how much forbs and browse and why they, certainly all the deer, and I always forget how to pronounce eagle, a three-stomached animal, feed on grasses. They feed on different grasses.
Right.
And our ranch has topography of over 200 feet difference. So Fletchway like to be a little lower and the black buck like to be a little higher. But the ranch manager has to ascertain how much grassland is available. And with that then sends out to the landowners to encourage us maybe to put some rye out during the, or maybe not to mow, so that as much grass, or again, as you here at Bamberger teach us what kind of grasses have the most nourishment. I think the surprise when I became a landowner and started I'd always wanted to be a landowner in the hill country, but I learned very quickly we are not landowners, we're land stewards, right? And now
Yes,
you
sir.
have to
That's
understand how to steward the land. And I learned, first of all, that not all cedar is bad, and not all grasses are good, because our property had a lot of KR bluestem, and KR bluestem isn't particularly nourishment for our grass eaters. Therefore, I needed to get more little bluestem, and through education and some seeding, how much of that do we put out, and when do we put it out, and when is it good to leave the agarita around the new oaks so that the deer won't eat the new oaks? And
Yes, sir.
Those are hard.
Yes, sir. That's
hardwoods.
very well said. George, if I'm not mistaken, it sounds like you may have participated in one or two Bamberger Ranch Preserve landowner workshops.
All three, and
Bingo.
it continues the education that these two taught me. It took me 3 years. First of all, the journey started. I wanted to be a landowner and retire to the hill country because I always knew it was unique. Didn't know why. And then I realized you had to be a steward. Well, to be a steward, you have to understand the land, right? And was well, I'd heard of all these things. It was far more complicated. But through Patty and Stephen's perseverance through our monthly work days, it was learn a little bit more. I started the naturalist program, and it was on the basis that there would not be a final exam, or
So no
thesis papers, Becky would say. And I finally got convinced that if I only learn 30 to 40% of what the class teaches, that's 30 or 40% more than I knew before I took it. And that proved to be true. I took the class and I certainly didn't learn much more than 30%. So then to Bamberger, I got to go through some more classes and some great workshops. And I probably only learned 30% there. Sorry.
Well, that's why you just keep coming back, right?
That's right. Every time we have the opportunity to tour the students, and the 3rd through 5th grade children just can ask some wonderful questions, and we will all normally there's 5 or 6 leaders besides the professional staff that take us on these walks, and I learn something every single time. Somebody in that group will stop at a tree and talk about a gull or how the bees got moved, and it's incredible when you just say the naturalists are protecting the land, but it's geology and soils and water conservation and therefore the different vegetation of grasses. And how many? 238 species of grasses
Yes.
we have here at Bamberger?
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, so you don't get to know it all.
Exactly.
But there are some that are good for the animals and some
exactly. And I like how you pointed out that it's really about land stewardship. And I also really like how you just pointed out that it's also the whole big picture. It's the whole picture that we're looking at when we're thinking about our land management decisions. So speaking of that, talk to us a little bit more about your ranch manager. How long has your ranch manager been with the ranches of Brushy Top? And the second part of my question would be, so I just would like to confirm that the ranch manager's purview is the entire 2,000 acres. Is that correct, Stephen? Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, he's not actually on your individual land unless you invite him.
Unless you invite him.
Yeah.
And 1 acre can be fenced.
How long has Mr. Jester been with us?
That's a very good question. We initially did not have a ranch manager in the early days. I'm trying to think when we actually built our home there in 2012. I don't think he was there.
Right, I think 14.
No,
I think
2014, 2015
Yeah.
is
So
when
by
he
the
time
joined
we were
us.
owners,
Okay.
He walked the ranch,
Right.
and that's when I got. I said we want to put a tree up, and he went where? Because even our elevation changes 180 feet and different rock and different soil
Right.
requires different trees to be planted.
Absolutely.
And then what kind of shrubs would be good for our animals that they love to eat. It's okay. So that was 214.
So your ranch manager's purview is the entire landscape across all the separate properties
Correct.
within, and so if you need the assistance or the counsel of the ranch manager, then you invite him onto your acreage, and he'll come and help and give some counsel.
We signed some paper that said, that he was willing to come. He was allowed to come and cull if it happened to be that situation. And so we did, and we assumed that would be a good thing. They have to do so much of that, especially with the white-tailed deer. So.
And
Absolutely.
As Stephen pointed out, we also fill out the form once a year for the 1D1, what grasses might have helped supplemental feed. Again, when the animals are stressed during August, or as Stephen mentioned, January, or what clearing we did. But we're doing any clearing. Stephen Jester likes to again advise, because there are areas on the slopes and what to clear. You're not trying to make it a park. You're trying to let the trees look natural and sustain themselves.
Right. Well, it's nice to have that counsel, because one of the things that we like to discuss with landowners is that it's nice to seek counsel from a professional biologist, a certified wildlife biologist, or one of our colleagues at the Natural Resources Institute, someone who can help a landowner decide help them map out their land management goals based on the size of acreage that they're managing, based on what the resources are, as you say, George, how much variation there is. And I think that's important because there may be some species that wouldn't be appropriate targets for management depending on the size of land that you're talking about. And of course, when it's managed throughout the whole landscape, then you might actually have some more choices and some more possibilities in terms of the species that you are managing for across a broader landscape.
There's another help plug-in for the naturalist program, but they have volunteers that have been in the program for years now that are part of, I think it's called MAP, is that right?
LMAP.
LMAP.
Land Management Appraisal Program.
There you go. That will come out to your property in a group of 4 or 5 and walk your 10 acres or your 5 acres and give advice and what to look for.
Wonderful.
I know small property management has been a sort of a difficult situation for some people, but a lot of people are trying to move out of the city and find a place. They may not know anything about the country or how to take care of their properties or anything, but they want this experience out here.
Right.
And so it's been a real challenge to have neighbors who were putting in lawns and sodding and pools and, I mean, they think they're somewhere, but I'm not sure. And it's all a part of getting it balanced,
Yes.
Once they realize what's there and how wonderful it is to have an animal just walk through your front yard and drop a baby or
Right.
whatever's going on that's really nature out there, I think they'll get more used to being a part of what we've got going out there. We have wonderful hiking trails and 2 lakes.
Nice.
So that's all part of the common area that we all own and we're allowed to enjoy anytime. My family loves it. The kids come out and the grandkids, and that's what it's all about.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Becky. So it probably can be a little challenging if you have on your part of the greater 2,000 acres, if you are specifically looking at focusing on managing for wildlife species or exotic species, whatever your goals are. But if you see that not everyone is as interested in that as you are, I can imagine that can be one of the challenges.
Yeah.
Yes.
Re-education. Again, a lot of the newer landowners are coming from the urban areas of Dallas or Houston, and their vision of the property is what is there. And we have some committees that review landscaping plans as an example, and it's an education more than a hard sell. That somebody will say, well, these are the plants, and we have to say, well, those are invasive to our hill country. They will take all the nourishments from our natives. And the first answer is, well, this is grown well in Houston for us. Yes, Houston happens to be a tropical environment and
very humid.
It's not, not vicious. It's not. You have to start the idea of the education of what was here and what was here before the 1820s and the 1880s.
Right.
Just trying to, nature survives. Nature knows how to support itself. We don't mess with it. So, re-educating them.
Right. Go ahead, Patty.
It's a case of they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And just as we originally did not have a ranch manager and we did now, one of the additional benefits of having a ranch manager is having this objective party that you can go to and consult with about your land and slowly discover. It's been my experience, what I've observed is people slowly discover what they didn't know. And that there are holes and maybe I better start looking a little farther too. And what starts to happen, and it seems just to be a natural progression over time, is they'll consult with someone like our ranch manager first, and then they'll go, maybe I need to go consult with the land management assessment program of our Texas Master Naturalist chapter. Oh, they have some recommendations too. A lot of them were very similar. I'm starting to get the message. They might go to Texas A&M Forest Service. They have another assessment program that they'll come out and do for you. They start going to Bamberger workshops. They start going to conservation expos. And just slowly they start filling in gaps that they didn't realize they had.
That's wonderful, Patty. It sounds like it's a real opportunity in some cases to really think about the importance of native plants and wildlife management, whatever your goals are, in terms of appropriate technologies in terms of those goals right here in Central Texas. It sounds like it's that sometimes when people are coming in from other areas and may not know what they don't know, as you said, that it really provides an opportunity for learning.
And, go ahead, Stephen.
I was going to say, I wish Patty would speak a little bit about her own personal experience. We have a lovely yard and some planters, and Patty started studying about, along with, this is part of the journey again, she started studying about what can grow out here without me watering it or having to manage it or trim it every
Right.
3 months in order to make it look right. And she was interested in, well, you tell them. Something that grows in the heat doesn't have to be watered. Something
Right.
that managed through the
I really
winter.
admire that, Patty. It sounds like you sat down and began to educate yourself.
Oh my!
Well, when we first bought the property, the developer had drilled wells and on a few of the lots just to prove that water was available out there. And at the time, rainwater collection was not quite in vogue just yet. But very quickly, people latched on to the notion of rainwater collection. And I'd say most of our neighbors out there now have rainwater collection rather than well water. But what you learn very quickly is you learn to conserve water, obviously, because it's not necessarily going to be raining every day and being collected every day, but you will be using it every day.
Right.
So that led me down the path of I wanted to find drought-tolerant plants to put in our backyard. And in doing so, I really got lucky with some of the choices that I made. Last year was a real testament to it. Most years, I will water once in July and once in August.
Wow. That's amazing.
Last year, with the drought, I thought, I'm going to push this to the limit. I did not water at all.
Wow.
Okay, did not water the plants at all. And I had plenty of blooms for all the pollinators all season.
That's wonderful.
Well into October. So it can be done. You have to do a little trial and error. Even though our backyard is fenced, I typically want to know if some of my native critters are going to be interested in those plants. I typically will take one when I'm going to buy a new one, and I'll go put it out on the driveway, and I'll leave it for a couple of days to see who expresses an interest. The fallow are my favorite, and they're also my #1 culprit. I actually have seen them on more than one occasion pick up the plant and toss it across the
Is that
driveway.
right?
That means we don't like this one, get it out of here, and that means it's a winner for my flower bed.
That's brilliant, Patty.
And it's their property once you put it out. The fallow are not bothered by us trying to shoo them away.
Right.
They could care less.
I think the biggest education, though, was what you don't know is the harm you could do. So we all talk about clearing, and if somebody comes, that doesn't mean with a bulldozer. That
Right.
means with maybe a weed eater, and it maybe not around all where hardwoods are coming up, and like clearing cedar isn't necessarily everywhere. The ranch manager teach you, and then there's the great surprises. So by not doing that, we find madrone trees starting.
Wonderful.
Madrone, if you didn't know what a madrone was, I didn't know what a madrone was when we bought the property, or that we had it, until our ranch manager was walking around. He says, "Oh, look at the madrone."
Wonderful.
And what does that mean? And it's so great. And so now even just the joy of walking the dog and just seeing little flowers like Becky was doing this morning, that you can identify that there's little, and I don't know all the flowers.
Would we find
You're learning.
mosswort or something?
Yeah, but little white blossoms were coming up today, and pink ones were yesterday.
Wonderful,
blue.
wonderful.
So it's just
That's
exciting.
great. That is fantastic. I'd like to kind of circle back to something you said, Becky. You mentioned that there's communal property. So we know that the 2,000 acres is being managed as one large unit. And you mentioned that there's some communal property that everybody who lives in the ranches of Brushy Top can use.
Yes.
And so talk a little bit more about that. You mentioned that it's a great place for the grandkids, but tell us a little bit more about it.
Right. Well, I'm not sure when they established it, maybe with the original layout of the properties, I guess, but they established 2 trails. And one starts at one end of the property, the other starts kind of in the middle, or on the west side and on the east side. And they go kind of in different directions, but they kind of end up, around the lakes and going back over a riparian area, and it's just a real lovely, some outcroppings and things that you can go to and see, and you're not necessarily in somebody's backyard,
Right.
you're kind of just out in nature. So those areas have been invaluable to say, let's go for a hike.
Right,
You're not trying to stay within your 5 acres,
right.
but you're going to go out there and go maybe from one end of the ranch to the other.
Right.
So it's very
And
exciting.
it's a part of the larger acreage that is mixed use. In other words, it's obviously a managed area,
Yes.
but you can recreate in it and enjoy it. Yes.
And the best part of my enjoyment of it is that other people are managing and working to make sure it stays really nice.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have an automatic trail until somebody goes through it and says, "Oh, there's a big hole
Right.
here, or we need to
Right.
fix."
It takes trail maintenance, and
yeah.
certainly we know about that here at Bamberger Ranch Preserve, and we're so grateful when we have help to manage the trails that we have out here.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. Let's talk about how the collaborative effort to manage those trails happens. Can you talk a little bit about that, Stephen?
Well, Patty's our manager.
Wonderful.
Every month.
We have something called Community Project Day. It occurs roughly the first Saturday of the month, 9 months out of the year. We take off July and August because it's hot, and December because we're having fun. But, yeah, and we only work half a day. The focus and purpose of Community Project Day was to help demonstrate to the appraisal district that we did indeed observe the guidelines set out for a 1D1 agricultural appraisal.
Right.
So that means we do a lot of fence maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
That is very high on our list. We do some ash juniper removal on occasion. We do some roosevelt weed control. We have collected grass seeds.
Yes.
Nice.
And we planted them in the subsequent spring.
Propagation of native grasses. Yes.
Absolutely. And that means less supplemental food we're going to have to buy if we have more grass.
Absolutely.
So this all kind of works hand in hand, works together there.
Mm-hmm.
So there are quite a few activities that we do as a community and as volunteers in our community to maintain some of these common areas, and also to maintain the working integrity of the ranch itself.
And the
Wonderful.
big fence line we have, oh gosh, north, south, east, west, we have, borders
For
that were
2,000 acres,
needing
yeah.
to be checked on every so often.
Absolutely.
And the people aren't always the people that we would say have ownership of that specific area do not necessarily go check it at all. So
Right.
they're going along our fence lines periodically and saying, oh, there's a great big hole here.
Right. That's important, isn't it? Because especially when you have a large property, that's a lot of fence, that's a lot of maintenance, and you can get a bad ice storm and you can have a big tree and you can have a breach in the fence. So that's a nice, so basically everybody is working together on these work days to try and address any problems like that will arise periodically when you have fences, right?
And a couple subcommittees, if you would. The trail maintenance often takes tractors and ability to shovel some good size
For talented people.
bull rock to fill erosion, and then on a couple parts of the trail by the outcropping Becky mentioned, there's some pretty good draws, and sometimes there's some bridge maintenance or bridge building that needs to be done. That we fortunately have some that are good carpenters, and then there's a subcommittee that really works on the lakes and the lake habitat
And the management of the habitat there.
feeding if necessary, or de-weeding when necessary.
Great.
The lakes are reasonable size. One is 9 acres, one's 11 acres.
Oh, yeah.
They're reasonably sized and need our attention.
Absolutely. Again, everything needs attention if it's going to be properly stewarded, right, George? Yes,
So,
absolutely.
Keeping water, the animals, all of them like to have water within a mile. So it's making sure that there is water.
Absolutely.
From one side of as Becky said, the north side to the south side, every mile there's some water.
Right. And that actually was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you. We've talked a little bit about supplemental feeding if it's needed, particularly in times of severe weather or stress. And we've talked about the fact that you have 2 good-sized lakes. Is there other supplemental water that you provide regularly?
Oh, that's many of the landowners have troughs. And as Patty mentioned, most of us have water tanks. Well, there's 2 things. One, a water tank overflows sometimes, and that water
In
is
times
often
of rain abundance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I don't know
Hard
what
to remember that right now.
It's been a few years. But so the overflow often gets captured and put into troughs. Also, rainwater collection systems generally have a flush for the first quarter inch of rain. Flushes the dirt from the roof off and away from the water tank. And those get put into troughs often. So it's a very nice, we'll say, wild, and for our exotics, you see them come by those quite often and drink a little water in it. And they, just as George said, they need something fairly close because they're eating all of the property.
Yeah, Becky mentioned and Patty mentioned the size of the 2 public recreation lakes that are available on landowners, where you can canoe or kayak or
Fish.
swim and definitely fish.
Yeah.
But there's on individuals' properties, there's 1, 2, 3 other lakes that are probably in the 1.5 acre, 2 acre size, that are again strategically located, and we're fortunate, like Bamberger, to be at an elevation that we're at the start of what will be Millard Creek or I can't think of the other one that's
Turkey Creek.
Turkey Creek. So being the lakes are spring fed, but that means when they overflow, they go downstream. But there's, like on our property, 2 draws that technically are the start of the creek that goes to the lake. And
Spring fed
and
sometimes.
as long as we maintain our property so that when there is water available, that the animals can go there, they simply do. And again, the joy of learning where you keep some of the cedars for windbreaks that the birds want, but
Right.
there's also nesting areas that we can find who bedded down overnight.
Right.
and that's all just part of keeping the creek
Right.
filling.
Exactly, and really maintaining your riparian area properly. Absolutely, yes. I want to note that we've talked about some clearing, and George, you pointed out that all clearing is not created the same, and that it's important to have some ash junipers on your property, and so it's a great opportunity to what we call it here at Bamberger Ranch Preserve is selective clearing. Because most people are going to have to do, or it's going to be within their goals to do some clearing. But like you said, it's not a, it's selective clearing based on your goals and the wildlife that you're trying to attract. And
Well, basic geology too, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but erosion and the
yes,
cedar tree
exactly.
is native to here because it kept the soil there.
Right.
And without soil, we don't have any vegetation.
Exactly.
We don't have any animals. So it really starts, and then certainly all of our birds love the cedar breaks.
Absolutely.
So you need those too.
Which is a perfect segue into my next question, which is we've talked about supplemental food, supplemental water. Across the collaboratively managed landscape, do you provide supplemental shelter?
Yeah, actually, we've done that on our property. We have at least a 200-foot elevation change on our property.
That's significant.
So you need a working trail to get up and down that kind of an elevation change. Well, you can't just make a straight line down the hill. That just brings erosion. So you have to be kind of particular about that. Well, in that process of creating the trail, you create a lot of brush. So I guess if you were really industrious, you'd haul it up. But that kind of defeats the purpose of some of the other uses for brush piles, which I find more productive, which is you can pile them around young madrone trees so the white-tailed deer don't eat them, or you can just stack them, make a nice little teepee somewhere and as shelter, and then go check on it later. That's the fun part, because I have this, you will build it, they will come philosophy about this. You just don't know what will come. It can be a little bit of a surprise to see what's in there sometimes. You'll go, oh my gosh, I didn't know we had those. Whatever, fill in the blank, whatever it may be. And then I want to try to attract species A, and sure enough, you get species A in there.
Wonderful. That's neat.
Just learning that even when you have brush on your property simply because of storms damage, but again, our property is 181 feet, not quite, but we wanted to have pathways for the grandchildren at first, and just to take that brush though and lay it horizontally looked a little messy year one, but people told us that by year 2 or 3 you would have steps, because it will stop the erosion, and the little pebbles, the little rocks, and the little leaves, and the little sticks will build up, and you'll actually have steps. And that's just proven to be absolutely true, and it's just sort of glorious now, because
Wonderful.
The grandchildren will say, oh, did you build these steps? Well, not really. So the brush horizontally, and learning a little trick like that.
Admitted, George, you just didn't want to drag it all the way over.
I can drag downhill quite successfully. Dragging uphill, there's got to be better things in nature. But so it's Patty. We actually have some shelters on the property that were originally goat sheds, but animals don't go there. They go where they can be bedded and out of the wind. And so when you have old growth cedars or brush piles, that's they're smart. They know which way the wind's coming and which way the rain's coming, and so shelter, yes, but it's not a structure. I don't want your audience to think that you got to go out and start putting up bricks and mortar, because that's not what native animals are accustomed to.
Right.
They are they do like to get out of the window, and they know when the northern's coming, and they know when it's coming up from the Gulf too. And that's where they'll go. So you provide shelter for them in the areas that are good to keep the soil anyway, like a mature grove of cedar. Sorry.
Well,
That's great.
There are small little mechanical shelters you can do.
Yeah.
At a Bamberger workshop, we were given some bluebird nesting boxes. And so those are artificially constructed little shelters, but they work quite well.
Yes, absolutely. That's an example of a small shelter that someone can find the plans for and even build themselves to provide some nesting sites for those cavity nesting birds. Absolutely. Wonderful.
So I was going to touch on something. After we realized that Steve was going to come out and look at our property, that's our property manager, Steve Jester, he said, you know, all this ridge line is getting a lot of wind damage. They're all red oaks, almost all of them, and they're really nice right now, but they are going to go. And you may need to start thinking about replacing those. And we're going, but big project.
Right.
George has gotten into it over these last couple of years, and we've got a lot of new trees.
That's wonderful. And so as a professional biologist and ranch manager, he was able to sort of look ahead to the way those trees are going to respond to the environment where they're located.
He was absolutely right.
Yes.
They've died and they've blown over, and they've just surprised us how seemingly healthy looking trees would just kick up their roots and be gone, and you're going, wow.
But he knew that, right?
And it's a long-term legacy, though. That was probably again, we had we were fortunate that our property had both KR blue stem, but a little blue stem.
Right.
And then,
So you had the desirable one in there too,
That's
not
right.
right.
And so we started making, I'm sorry, first coming up from Houston, it was okay. So we go look at the catalog, and we go to the native seed farm, and we buy the native seed, and we plant it, and next year it's all gone. And of course that wasn't as successful. So I brought the ranch manager back the next year, and he says, "Oh, you clearly made progress. This is a 5-7. This took 14,000 years to get this way.
Right.
Changing it in year one from what's blowing in the wind. So you look at it long term, and we're on our 8th year now, and it's just incredible the change we've made.
We've only mowed it all down twice, right? The 5 acres on the top, that is. But it does go down.
Right. You have some
only
major
1/3.
elevational gradient too, just like these guys.
Which
Right.
is
It's
the way-
1/3 over a 5-year plan. Not
The way they designed
you
the
never
properties.
do everything. Everything's in thirds, right?
Exactly. It's also generally written in pencil, right? Well, it sounds like the ranch manager is a wonderful resource for the individual landowners within the larger 2,000 acres. It sounds like that's a really nice resource to help with management goals
Very necessary.
and decisions.
Very necessary resource. On a property as we have, the 2,000 acres, and within it, many different people viewing the acreage in their lot only. It's good to have a single person who is aware of what everybody wants to do, or any single person wants to do,
Yeah.
and measure from that perspective. I was going to add something if I could, because you are talking about communal.
Yes, please do.
Let me say that we have people who like manicured lawns, and that's okay. Okay. That doesn't mean everybody has to participate as fully as we have in trying to develop wildlife habitats. And many people's backyards are fenced, and they grow their roses or their flowers or their vegetable gardens, as it may be. And outside the fence, they do a lot of work towards helping the wildlife. So it's not all one mind in the
Sure.
ranch. and people have
And nor does it have to be, right? Right.
grapevines, and it doesn't
Right.
have to be. So you can carve out a little area for your own to grow your subtropical trees
As long as you
if you want. But at the same time, you can also participate in we'll call it keeping Texas native.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thanks for kind of discussing that aspect of it too. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
So,
I think the ranch manager is very important, but I want to go back to really what how Patty started. The amount of access to education is on websites and apps now is so enormous, because when you're talking to a biologist or when you're talking to the ranch manager, you have to know enough to ask. And for new landowners coming to smaller properties from urban areas, just know it's an educational process. It's not over 1 year. So having a ranch manager, having a landowners association, having a Bamberger Ranch and classes, and having the master naturalist or master gardeners program. There are so many websites and I'm trying to say Zoom programs. I can't think what that term is right now. That you can go to, just avail that bill to avail yourself to it, and you don't have to know everything. I mean, you may like mammals, you may like birds, you may like grasses, and you may like trees. You can decide which one you want to know more about.
excellent. Thank you, George. Yes. Great comment.
But also the situations that come up off and on that you'll say, oh my, I think there's a dead animal out there. Or there's pigs coming up the draw.
Right.
You need somebody to call.
Yes.
I
yes.
don't deal with that sort of stuff, so I need somebody to call. So that's the land manager.
And
Absolutely. That's another strength, isn't it? Yes.
And
we'd all
great
be
neighbors.
remiss.
And
I
nice
think.
neighbors. Absolutely.
We'd all be remiss, I think, as master naturalists, if we didn't mention that every county has an agrilife
That's right.
capability and a forestry service person who runs that, and those also were the first one we called on after a what was it, an agrilife show in Johnson City
Yes.
was Robert Edmondson, who's well known in this area.
Yes, he sure
And he said,
is.
please come out here and tell us what we're doing.
Yes.
And he spent probably 4 hours, I think 4 hours on a fairly hot day, and then sent us a lot of literature that we read through.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but I spent 4 hours walking our property with us a little bit, and that's all available to anyone, anywhere.
That's priceless.
Thank you very much for bringing that up, because it is, the AgriLife Extension is an incredibly valuable resource here in
Yeah,
Texas. And not everybody knows that they can reach out to their local agent and
For
really
anything
get
to do
some.
with their property.
Right.
It sounds very agricultural. Well, a farmer might need that, or a rancher might, but no, they're there for everyone in the county.
Yes, sir. That's great. Thank you for bringing that up.
Not everybody knows the answer to every question. You know, the first call you may make to any agency. But what I find is their willingness to say, but I will find somebody who can answer that question for you, and they do follow up.
That's a good point.
So as long as you don't have to have instantaneous results, you should be in good shape. Just have a little patience, and you will get your answer.
Excellent.
Yes. But if a wild pick is coming up towards you, that's when you want to
That's-
run to the
You wanna
house and make a
call.
call.
But then all the little piglets start coming up.
Wonderful. Is there anything else that you guys would like to share about your experience of living on a property that is managed in many, many ways as a whole, over 2,000 acres, and avails of the 1D1 agricultural evaluation? Anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to just add to our discussion?
I guess we've sort of said this already, but maybe just sum it up a little bit, is it's a learning process. You don't do it all in a day. And something you may have learned 20 years ago, there may be some new thinking about it. So don't get very rigid in some of your ideas as well going forward. It's a journey.
Excellent.
And our journey started looking at large properties that we thought were going to be large. At least we thought they were going to be comfortable, but 40 acres?
Yeah, we started looking
was
for
the
50
first
acres, and then we walked it, and then 40 acres, and again, you have to consider the topography. Our property is 9.8, but with the 200-foot drop, it's probably 22 acres of walking.
Of walking.
Especially uphill.
Right.
So there's enough environment, and you don't have to have a 2,000-acre ranch. Like Stephen said, you could take a 3-acre, and you can take your backyard and fence it and grow your lawn and put plants in there that are harmful even to the animals, some, but then you can expand and have a different environment for 2 acres, a different environment for that 3rd acre. And if you have different topography like we do, it's that way anyway.
Right.
The steeper slopes and the rocky, just the soil's different. At the ranch of 2,000 acres and more than 200 feet of elevation change, again, the soil condition at what we call the lowland by the West Lake is, we have days that it may not be raining by Stephen and us, and we'll call down to some of our neighbors, and they got 3/8 of an inch.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. We also see temperature differentials. too.
Oh, I'm sure that's true.
And then
Yes.
part of the ranch can be in the clouds and one day, and then another day the lower levels down in the fog. It's just
we'll be
it's
told
an
It's
ever-changing
amazing.
environment.
go down and get the mail, and it's not even raining down there, right?
It's amazing.
And in spite of the fear I had of a gated community, it has been wonderful, and I'm very thankful that it works.
Oh, now you're going to tell the story. They'll tell you this later, but they do have a story for the first day they arrived after buying the land.
Oh boy.
I'm sure that George and Becky have a lot of stories. Well, thank you all very, very much for coming out today and sharing your experiences with us, because again, I think that these kinds of properties that are managed across large landscapes are going to become more and more important as we move forward and as the population here in Central Texas continues to grow in the way that we've seen it growing over the past decade. So thank you all very much for your time, and thank you for what you do in the Master Naturalist program and for all of the wonderful support that you give us here at Bamberger Ranch Preserve.
Happy to be of service. You know that.
Absolutely love it.
It's a reciprocal relationship.
It is.
What you all are doing for all the students that you bring out here that would never see landscapes like Mr. Bamberger put together, is they're not going to be able to see this. You said you should get this on film, but when Mr. Bamberger bought this property, he was the
Yes.
75th largest, and now he's the 17th or something.
Right. In 1969, the original 3,000 acres of Bamberger Ranch Preserve was the 17th largest property in Blanco County. And now, at 5,500 acres, we're the 3rd largest property in Blanco County. Wow. So that kind of gives you an idea of that fragmentation that we've been talking about.
Again, that's a joy for us to even come see from our size to this size.
Yes.
But what the students get to see that they absolutely are in awe of is just a great service for the future.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.